David Farley has spent his whole professional career in agriculture and in agribusiness in particular through both publicly listed and private companies, probably best known to you as the boss of Collie Cotton and AACO, someone who clearly relishes challenging times and changing times. David's an enthusiast for innovation, technology and thinking beyond, from better marketing of commodities to how to end the current obesity epidemic. From Matrix Commodities, David Farley. Thank you, David.
Thank you. It's nearly 2 years ago since Gillian Sambrook invited me to participate at this conference, and of course we had the interruption of COVID in between. But Gillian said you've got 20 minutes to talk about the big picture. Recently, the 20 minutes was brought down to 15 minutes, and that 15 minutes has now been trimmed to 13 minutes. But before I go into my presentation, let me give you a little bit of frivolous time of, say, 40 seconds. In preparing for this presentation, down at my recent project, the Waverley Mill, which is focusing on regenerating and reprocessing woolen product back into life again, I was sitting in the boardroom just prior to a meeting with the ladies from the Confin room. The Confin room is consumer finishing room where all the final quality checks are taking place and prepared for market, principally going through to the 3PL, the pick, pack and post from the e-commerce portal. And I had a lot of paperwork set out on the table on the conference and went through it. And of the 9 ladies that came in, they started looking at my work and got interested in it and said, wow, this is interesting. And one of them said, gee, this is good. Wow, one of them said. And I looked across and said, what's interesting about it? And they picked up a bit of paper, and the young Asian girl with her big index finger, and she said, this is interesting. And I said, that's Charlie Arnott. that image that was projected by Charlie in his presence with his Ren bandana and his hat, and that was a great brand to get at least the ladies with Confin interested. Now let me focus on the job ahead. The job of agriculture is feeding people globally. Part of our job here in Australia is not only to feed Australians, but to feed part of the globe as well, not all of the globe. So if you start defining what is the size of the job from 2021 through to 2050, what's required? So the first thing to do is probably have a look at the customer base and what's the customer going to do. And at the moment, we sit here with about 7.8 billion people in the world, with a projection that the world will go to 9.8, maybe 10 billion people in the world before we see a drop off. And that's 2050. But put 2050 in perspective, that's 29 harvests away. That's not far at all. 29 harvests or 29 plantings, if you put it in that perspective. And what have we got to do there? Well, first of all, to focus on where is the customer and where is that growth principally going to come from? It's going to come from sub-Saharan Africa and the Medina area in particular, where birth rates at the moment are running around 5.2 per breeding age woman, and ultimately they're going to slowly come back down, but that won't come back down until we really get in past the 2050 period. What's also going to happen is we're going to have an ageing population. The population with people over 60 will double itself, then treble itself out there as well. So not only are we going to know where the client is and the age group of that client, but we'll also understand that in the modern and the Western world, where we're not at replacement numbers now, is that we'll have a powerful ageing population. And you look at the food types that are required for not only that region, but not only for that lifestyle, but then for that age group as well, which are totally different. So I find the challenge that we've got in front of us interesting, challenging. It's definitely not daunting, because I've had the opportunity to look into the future from many of the travels that I've had around the world. 20, 30 years ago, I would have asked myself, how can you have continual economic growth on a planet that's got defined and limited resources? Yet if I look at it today, and what I'm learning today about it is, we can comfortably meet that challenge, but we need to meet it in a manner that we can sustain. We can sustain not only ourselves, but we can sustain the land that we're going to produce it off. So if you ask yourself, what is food security? Food security occurs when all the people are able to access enough safe and nutritious food to meet their requirements for a healthy life in the ways that the planet that can sustain itself into the future, which is very, very important. Food security not only faces a powerful amount of challenges, and more importantly, it faces some challenges that we're putting upon ourselves. Alan's done a great job outlining the challenges and the certainty, unless we change, the certainty of where we'll finish up, which is the demise of mankind, unless we address those changes. Alan's very keen that we address those changes through our political forces. Well, if you judge Canberra today and what the debate is, I think we've got a fair way before we could actually put this in front of the Prime Minister. But what I'm learning very, very quickly is that commerce, the capital markets, can also bring about change very quickly. As you know, Uber didn't come knocking on the door of the Australian taxi industry, the Australian Transport Minister, to bring their model to Australia. Airbnb didn't knock on the door to the accommodation industry or other government bodies that regulate hotels and motels to bring their model to Australia. Nor did Facebook and the internet providers knock on the door of Telstra or Optus to say, hey, we're coming to town to do this. The reality is if the market works and the model works and works for the good, it soon gets adopted and government's got to play pretty quickly the catch-up role about it. Some of the big challenges, though, that we've got today is we've got a world that has equal amount of people that are undernourished. Then on the other side of it, we've got a world where people are overnourished. And we've got the challenge of meeting the overnourishment, especially that comes through wrong food types, in meeting the obesity challenge of the world that passes on to other non-communicable diseases, stroke, heart attack, some of the cancers, and especially type 2 diabetes. And if you look at it from a global perspective, just what is weight, or another way to look at it, what is the wrong type of food doing to us? It's costing the globe in excess of $2 trillion annually. That's bigger than the last financial crisis we had. So what could you do with $2 trillion? You can do a hell of a lot. You can educate, you can create, you can motivate, and you can reposition a lot of industry. Without doubt, when Alan summed it up, agriculture is essential. It's food. Yet agriculture uses 70% of all the fresh water and produces around a third of all the greenhouse gas emissions. It's proven year in, year out, and history's got it there, that it also mismanaged leads to biodiversity loss and soil denigration. There's no new land for agriculture, or none that I'm aware of anyway. So finding new methods to sustainably produce food on all current available land mass is impressive. And that's what today's conference is about, or over the next few days. The current trajectory of the food system will likely account for most of the carbon for the budget of a 2 degrees temperature increase by 2050, not leaving any room for other industries to participate, especially if you're looking at the secondary industries of refining and manufacturing. At the same time, while we're trying to meet that challenge, around 800 million people face hunger on a daily basis, and more than 2 billion people actually lack the vital micronutrients, being zinc, vitamin A and iron, will ultimately affect their health. And I reflect back quite clearly on that, as when Australia interrupted the live cattle exports to Indonesia, and sitting at a table with then Minister of Agriculture, God, he's such an impressive guy, his name's forgettable to me, Emerson, who was Foreign Minister, and across the table from us was a gentleman called Jita Rajavan, who was their Trade Minister at the time. And even though I don't know Bahasa intensely of his language, but I know enough of it because I was trading with the Indonesians for quite some time, both in cotton and in cattle and in meat, to understand the words that Indra put to our representatives at the time. And they went something like this, and I put it in the Australian vernacular, not in the Indonesian one, but this is when you reinterpret it. It went like this, and as I said, this is in the Australian vernacular, maybe the bush vernacular, but let me take the liberty, please. It said, if you bastards ever do that again, the 500,000 Australians holidaying on our islands of Bali will leave when we're ready for them to leave. If you ever do that again, we'll interrupt your liquid fuel supplies that will stop your nation. If you ever do that again, we will learn to buy wheat, because they're our biggest wheat buyer, from other nations. Then they went on, do you realise what you've done? You've interrupted our aspirations for our children. We Indonesians eat 35 grams of red meat every year per person. You Australians eat 37 kilograms. We understand what red meat proteins does to the development of our children's minds, our ability to become responsive and intellectually capable of using the technologies of the future. You have disrupted our future, but more importantly, you've disrupted our immediacy of what we're doing with rural youth and employment. Because all the feedlots in Indonesia, and there's many of them, there was no mechanisation at all. It was all done by labour. So what we did through a policy here in Australia, and considering that our partner was the Australian government in that trade, they backed us dollar for dollar, considering what we were doing was we were working on version 4 of what was called the knocking box, the constraint box, we stopped not only a trade, but we stopped the aspirations of a nation. So politics, you need to be very careful with it. As I move through here now, I'm cognizant that I'm kind of 5 minutes into 13 minutes. Looking at food over the next 35 years, we have to produce more food in this period of time than what mankind has produced in history. Think of that as a challenge. Within 29 harvests, we've got to produce in the next period of time, we have to produce more food than man has produced before us. That's some challenge. And we've got to produce it off the same land mass that we've got today. Is it achievable? Definitely achievable. Well, it look like having a world by 2050 that 70% of the world's population will be urbanised. If we maintain the status quo as we've got it today, we'll fall short, substantially fall short. At the moment, as I mentioned earlier, 70% of all fresh water is used by agriculture, yet if we maintain that momentum, we'll need to have 120% available more water to us by 2050. If we maintain the current production levels, we need 42% more cropping land and be prepared to lose 14% of our forest base. And at the same time, our greenhouse gas emissions will increase by 77%. Even if we adopt sustainable intensification of agriculture, we don't move the needle enough. In other words, we still haven't got enough natural resource base to get us there. The Paris Agreement is all focused on what are we doing with global warming. We're trying to hold global warming that it only increases by 2 degrees Celsius. Yet we're aspirational in it to bring that back to 1.5. Yet if you do the math, and no matter how you do the math at the moment, the existing model of agriculture has to change. It has to change if we want to feed the people. It has to change if we want to meet the Paris Agreement, the Paris Accord, but more importantly, it has to change if we want to continue mankind on as we know it today. Climate change as we know it will not only affect agriculture, it will affect the whole food chain. Something like in the developing and undeveloping worlds, if we go to India and Pakistan, something like 82% of the food grown is actually lost between harvest and retail itself. They at the moment, in countries that not only haven't got the infrastructure for it, refrigeration in particular, haven't got the energy capacity to generate the electricity for it, and more importantly, haven't got the retail models that allow for longer shelf life. So not only is it agriculture that needs to change, it's the food change in itself. Understanding how we're prepared to change is a challenge in itself. I'm not in 100% agreement with Alan at all that it's all about the politicians. They will play a role, but I find that in instances of how quickly technology is moving, how quickly the demand for us, the agriculturalists, the agricultural traders, the agricultural scientists and the agricultural engineers to get this right, they'll have the opportunity to play catch up and probably structure it. I am convinced though, with a combination of science, both science in plant technology, engineering technology and fintech, blockchain in particular, and what we can do with some of these tools, that we can actually structure capital markets now that will incentivise people, producers just like yourself, that will create a whole new asset class to come onto your land that will become a fungible asset that can be transported and changed into another wealth in itself. Now that wealth may be the form of a token that can be in credit, it could be in the form of cash, and it could be in the form of just asset appreciation on the land. But ultimately, farm management practices will become a tool in themselves. People like me, who have grandchildren, will be teaching them values of asset growth, asset wealth appreciation through management practices that I wasn't trained in, yet I will become aware of. If I reach out even further and start looking about where should we go for that knowledge, there's a great author at the moment, David Birch, who's written two interesting books. He's written previous ones, but the two interesting ones is Babylon and Bitcoin and Beyond, and his current book is Cold Currency Wars. And what they're focusing about is on digitised currencies, encrypted currencies, and as we know them, the Bitcoins, the Eurethiums, etc. But what can we do with agricultural practices, agricultural management systems that are designed to do good? And do good is, it could be about carbon sequestration, it could be about longevity, it could be about the quality of foods that are coming off the top of them. But if all of these practices can be verified, if they can be authentication models put around them, they will become fungible assets that can be traded either in the short term or in the long term. They will become assets that are stapled to your land that are cash flow benefit, but more importantly, asset accretive. So it's just not yourselves as farmers and landowners that are looking for it. If you go, one of the fortunate jobs I've got at the moment, I work with a guy called Carter Williams. Carter Williams is the CEO of the iSelect Fund based out of St. Louis, Missouri. He's a quirky guy. He left college, his university college, and went to Boeing. The government took him out of Boeing and put him into what was called the Skunk Works programs, which is about fast jets, missiles and all that stuff. He went from there and then started looking at where life was taking him, where was things going, and he created this business called iSelect, and it's the iSelect Fund, and it focuses on food production and health. And it's a seed funder, an angel funder, and a Series A, B and C funder of new agricultural operations. He puts together once a year a conference. It used to be called Davos on the Delta, it held in Memphis, but he lost that through rights names over Davos. But he still holds it, and I'm fortunate enough to sit on one of the selection committees that focuses on where we're going to put this capital. But the more interesting is not only applying this capital to agricultural new technologies and new pursuit, but it's where's the capital coming from? And it's sitting down with the high net wealth families of the US. The Walton family is one, the Koch family, the big oil line travellers, the old Vanderbilt family and others, who have big teams of people managing their family wealth. And they've come along with a mission for this family wealth about how do we invest in a better world and something that's more sustainable. And so we start off the program not only backing good entrepreneurs with good ideas, and we've been able to take some products that have come from Australia that have ended up in US hands and take them into a whole new life area. But more importantly, the capital itself is just like you, it's got a purpose. It's wanting to do good, it's wanting to put something together about sustainability. And to give you some idea of the size of it, since the first of the year and coming in on the closing stage of this end month, $2 billion of US capital has been raised for projects, principally in America, parts of South America and parts of Australia, just focusing on the sustainability of agriculture and the tools that will get us there. And some of those tools are absolutely amazing. And when I look inside some of those companies, you meet the entrepreneurs behind it, but they're in a mind space that, but quite frankly, I have to ask them to repeat themselves and bring it back into focus so someone of my age can put it together. But their ability through artificial intelligence, mega computing, the ability to accelerate programs, not only in a greenhouse, but to be able to look at the math behind it and the art of the algorithm, the art of the logarithmic math, etc., to be able to set up programs and achieve in a season, which could take us 20 to 25 seasons to do, is just absolutely amazing. So that gives me confidence in mankind. And I think we've actually seen that with those skills, especially developing the jab, as the Prime Minister calls it, with 3 major companies in the fight against the COVID. So as my time now is wrapping up, I look at the challenge. Yes, we've got a lot of people to feed. We've got a defined land mass to do it. we have got an audience today, which I'm convinced is you're only here for one reason, is to be how do we look after the precious asset of earth. Then we've also got a whole new market out there today of capital, available people, willing people, and in some instances, not all, we've got some governments. Our government's not one of them, but other parts of the world, we've got governments, especially in the Nordic countries, who are engaging in this pursuit of sustainability of land. So I think, can we feed 9.8 billion people? Yes. Can we do it ourselves? No. It'll be a combination of yourselves, it'll be a combination of science, technology, it'll be a combination of trailing governments, but more importantly, it'll be a combination of a commitment for all to get there. I find the space incredibly exciting for anyone to be in. Earlier in my career, we took on some projects that was, how do I look after a core team of people when I was managing Collie Cotton through the big droughts? We had a quirky guy, and Susie, you may remember this guy, John Cameron, we put together a company called Agricultural Australia, and we decided to keep the agronomists and the engineers together and place them out in the world. And two projects which I look back on now, which we placed them out in the world, at the end of the 80s droughts going into the 90s, was a project in the Sudan, working on the Gezira floodplains, on how to, started out how do we rehabilitate the cotton ginneries, but ultimately it took us to how do we survey the land to put title on land of this 2.8 million fadans, which is about 2.4 million acres of land, to create title so those titles could be traded, and then ultimately people would invest in land. And the next project was in Uzbekistan itself, where we went about similar with GPS navigation, sitting down with old tribal elders and owners, part socialised, part still tribal, of how to put land title together. And from there now, from that early work of the 80s, and I look through to it now, where you took one lot of country, one lots of farming out of virtually feudal position, one look at it out of a socialist position, and you look at the productivity from that land today, just by creating land size, creating fungible assets in effect, because they did have land title then, and now how they've been able to get to a critical mass of size to use the technologies that are available. And what you clearly learn out of that, you can't be green while you're trading in the red. You need to be profitable to be green. So it's up to governments, and in this case, what we did with the World Bank was to get there. And I find it really, really interesting at the end of the day when you look at it, and again, if I go back to David Birch's book, but more importantly, a book that was written, The History of Homo Sapiens, what drives and pulls it all together, you know? Sometimes it can be religion, sometimes it can be nationalism, but at the end of the day, it's the capital model that puts it together, because people want to be rewarded. And there will be, in the current model, a powerful amount of reward coming for and available to sustainable agricultural practices. Thank you.